The most important part about having a relationship with Jesus is the possibility of a restored life. Jesus provides us with a reason to live. Jesus wants us to live abundantly. Jesus wants us to follow His lead and in our own lives show compassion. Restoring life isn't just about eternal life, but a renewed life in the present. This morning we're looking at two stories where Jesus restored life. And one, He brings a child back from the dead, but the other is just as important as He restores life to a woman who has been an outcast for a dozen years. Of course, both are going to die again. But that's a part of the human condition. Imagine what these two did with the time that was remaining in their lives after having been given this incredible gift from Jesus. Or think of the excitement of the parents of that little girl, or the husband and the family of the woman that had been shunned for so many years, who finally had their mom back. Jesus calls us to live knowing that we are loved and that we are cared for and watched over by God. What does this mean for your life? Last week we saw Jesus and the disciples on the west bank of Galilee where He dealt with the unclean. He was in a Gentile area, so the people themselves were seen as unclean. He healed a man who was seen as crazy, who was demon-possessed. A man who would have been shunned by the Jews just as he was shunned by the Gentiles. And he was in an area where they raised hogs in large numbers, an animal that, according to the Jewish customs of the time, was considered unclean. Today, we're going to see what happens when Jesus comes back to the other side of the lake, to the east bank. Think that His run-in with those who are unclean has ended? Not a chance. But let's see. Our text is from the 8th chapter of Luke, beginning with verse 40. So listen for God to speak to us through His word at this time. Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed Him, for they were all waiting for Him. Just then there came a man, Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He fell at Jesus' feet and begged Him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, who was dying. As he went, the crowds pressed in on Him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years, and though she had spent all that she had on physicians, no one could cure her. She came up behind Him and touched the fringe of His clothes, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Then Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" When all deny it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and press in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. For I noticed that power had gone out from me." When the woman saw that she could not remain hidden, she came trembling, and falling before Him, she declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched Him and how she had been immediately healed. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While He was still speaking, someone came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher any longer." When Jesus heard this, He replied, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be saved." When He came to the house, He did not allow anyone to enter with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. They were all weeping and wailing for her, but he said, "Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and called out, "Child, get up." Her spirit returned, and she got up at once. Then he directed them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them to tell no one what had happened. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Opening day of the college football season, 2007, featured the Appalachian Mountaineers against one of the dominant teams throughout the history of college football, the Michigan Wolverines. Michigan was rated 5 in the national polls as that season began. Appalachian wasn't even in the same division. At the time, I was living in Hastings, Michigan. A few months before the game, my Uncle Larry called me. Larry's kind of like my older brother. He's a lot closer to my age than to my father's, who is his brother. And he's also a graduate of Appalachian State. And he wanted a chance to see this historic game and was able to get tickets and had planned to fly up if I could provide a place for him to crash and drive us the 2 hours back and forth across the state to the big house there in Ann Arbor. So he and his daughter Mackenzie, who's a couple years older than Caroline, came up a day early. We did some touring around West Michigan, but we made sure we got to bed early on Friday night so we could get up really early on Saturday morning to make our way to the game. So Larry and Mackenzie, along with Caroline and I, got up early, and after breakfast we headed across the state on Interstate 94. And I could tell Larry was nervous about what he was about to experience. He kept returning to his hope that the game wouldn't be a blowout, that his team, wouldn't be able to hardly show up against somebody like Michigan, who was in a completely different division. I mean, they might as well have been playing an NFL team. In a sense, Appalachian was offered as sacrificial meat to one of the top programs in college football for their opening day triumph. We arrived in Ann Arbor a little after 9 a.m. for a game that starts at 1 p.m. But it was good to be early because once we got off that exit and into Ann Arbor, it took us another hour just to find a place and to get parked. I mean, when you got to get 107,000 people into a stadium, it takes some time to get everybody there. But we got there in time to enjoy the pregame. We went to a tailgate party for Appalachian alum. And a little afternoon, we moved toward the big house and found our seats. The game began. But it didn't begin as expected because both teams quickly threw up points on the scoreboard. But in the second quarter, the Mountaineers dominated Michigan, racking up 21 points. And by the half, they were leading by 14 points. In the second half, Michigan slowly crawled back. And with 4 seconds left in the game, they had the ball. I don't remember, they were on like the 10 or 20 yard line or something, and they were down by just 2 points. All they needed was a field goal, a simple chip shot, and it would all be over. But the mountaineers blocked the kick, and it was over. Driving back across Michigan, my uncle floated somewhere above my vehicle. He couldn't believe it. Was Larry a spectator without faith? Of course, football's just a game. When it comes to Jesus, let me ask this question. Do we have faith? Or are we just spectators, seeing what's going to happen? Think of our story this morning. We have two examples of faith, a concerned father and a sick woman. And they both experience an incredible miracle, while most people present in the crowd, I would say, are just spectators. Our story picks up where we left off last week. Jesus and his disciples have sailed back across Galilee. I assume this time they didn't have any bad weather. And there's a crowd that's waiting for Jesus there on the east bank. His popularity has risen. Everyone wants to see him. But how many of these people that want to see Jesus really know what's up about him? I mean, they probably not yet heard the news of the demons and the pigs and the calming of the sea. And what happens next is going to blow their minds if they hear about it. In the previous weeks, we've seen Jesus as God, forgiving sins, controlling the weather, freeing someone from evil. And now in our story today, Jesus not only heals, but he restores life. As Jesus comes ashore, he's met by Jairus, a leader of the synagogue, a man who had standing within the Jewish community of the day. Jairus is desperate, for his daughter is dying. And he pleads with Jesus for him to come to his house and to tend to his daughter, to heal her. And Jesus agrees. And they head off. But they have to push through the crowds to make their way forward, because everyone wants to see Jesus. Everyone wants a piece of Jesus. And most probably have no idea that Jesus is now on this life-saving mission. After all, in the first century, you didn't have ambulances and sirens and flashing lights to clear the path. Then Luke takes our story in a different direction. As a literary device, this is a clever interruption. But it leaves us hanging. Because there's this girl in need, but Jesus now has to attend to something else. It builds tension in our minds because we're all with Jesus. We're ready to go with Jesus and Jairus to his house and to see this healing of his girl. But Jesus pauses. There's something else happening. Someone has touched his garment, and Jesus wants to know who. And Peter realizes the impossibility of that kind of question. I mean, everyone's pressing in on Jesus. I mean, everybody's been touching him. What do you mean, who touched you? I mean, think about being on a Japanese subway. If you've ever experienced such travel there, or maybe at least seen it, depicted on TV or something, where during rush hour, they actually have people on the platform, and when the trains open up and the people just pour into the cars, they have to have people to push them on in so they can get the doors closed so the train can go on down the line. Everyone has been touching Jesus. And now he wants to know who touched him. But he does acknowledge something else, that there's power that has gone out of him. And we're told that there's a woman who wasn't trying to hold Jesus up, but who had sought out Jesus to touch him in the hope that she would be healed. After all, she spent all her money on the doctors of the day, and none of them have been able to do anything. And that's what happens. She is healed. And after 12 years, she's well. She was suffering from what my mother used to call female issues. If a woman from the church was in the hospital and we would ask about her, why she was there, and my mother said female issues, that meant don't ask any more questions. The problem, though, is that this bleeding has gone on for 12 years. And during this time, she was considered unclean. The Old Testament law said so. She wasn't even supposed to be there in that crowd. She was supposed to separate herself from others. But now we learn she has been made well. And when she identifies herself to Jesus, Jesus pronounces her very tenderly to be daughter, and tells her that her faith has made her well. It was her faith that led her to seek out Jesus. Healed and now able to be accepted back within the society, Jesus sends her on her way in peace. So way to go, Jesus. It's a nice interlude. Some good ministry has been done. However, while we're dealing with this woman, Jairus' daughter dies, and messengers arrive to inform Jairus and to tell him it's too late. There's no need to bother Jesus anymore. Now, from our experience, death is final. People don't just pop up from the casket and ask if they can be first in line for the ham and funeral potatoes along with a serving of Jell-O salad and some of that chocolate cake. Jesus, however, assures Jairus that if he trusts in God and doesn't sink down into despair, everything's going to be okay. So they continue on to his house, where lies a corpse that had been this alive 12-year-old daughter of Jairus'. Like the bleeding woman, a corpse was also considered unclean in the world at that time. But it doesn't bother Jesus, who takes 3 of his closest disciples and he goes into the room where the girl lays. He sends out the mourners, everybody else, only the mother and father and the 3 disciples and Jesus and the corpse are there. As the mourners are leaving, they laugh. They think Jesus is nuts. But then he addresses the girl, telling her to get up. And we're told that her spirit returned. God gives life. Every breath that we take is from God. The girl, like Adam in the garden, comes to life once the Spirit, once the breath of God enters her. And realizing that she's been through a trauma, Jesus has food brought to her and then surprisingly tells her parents and the disciples not to tell anyone. Jesus acknowledges that the woman's faith had made her well. For it was her faith that caused her to seek out Jesus, the great healer. And he also told the Father to have faith and that everything would work out. However, Jesus' role is undoubtedly necessary here. For it wasn't faith alone that generated these events. As one commentator noted, faith doesn't generate these events, but healing does come from faith. Perhaps we could best look at it this way. We're to have faith, not that healing will necessarily occur, but faith that we are loved and that we are cared for by the Almighty in a most intimate way, as shown to us by Jesus in these two stories. And Jesus' example of caring for us is to be our model as we strive to care for this world, for those who are around us, who often, even though they live, are dead to life. But we're called to have faith because we trust that God is doing something so much greater than we can ever imagine, despite any evidence to the contrary in the world in which we live. We're not called to be a spectator. Life is not a football game. We're called to participate with Jesus in this world by showing the concern he showed to others. Let us love as Jesus loved. Amen.